is former Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka, who I was actually in contact last night with, trying to set something up for today, not knowing yet that the suspect would be apprehended, and we both sort of texted and said, you know, hallelujah, this is the best news that we could possibly have at that moment. What a relief. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Amy, yeah, just connecting last night, and I got to watch your program and the compassion that you guys presented, and the relief that we all feel now that he was caught. And I know he's accused. I have to be careful there. That there's a fair trial, but it was a tremendous relief that just poured over my soul, and now it settles into the all grief. Because I will say, my own county sheriff up here said, hey, I'm sending patrol cars by your place, because we didn't know at the time that it was a completely Democrat list. And I tell people, I don't care. I mean, if somebody's crazy, I could point to this on both sides: assassination attempts of Trump or the CEO of United Health, and in this case, Melissa Hortman. It's just like, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we've got to figure out how to be more civil and create a culture that has more honor and more civility in it as we discuss our ideas and disagree and confront. And I think we can do it. It's just that it just feels like it's a mandate now. We've got to do this.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the time that you spent working with Representative Hortman, because as you're saying this, it makes me think back to that time frame and the lawmakers who were there at the time, and those leaders who were really able to work in a bipartisan way, respectfully, as reporters, as people covering the Capitol. Maybe people don't notice it at home, but we notice that kind of thing, because unfortunately it's the exception and not the rule sometimes. What was your relationship like with her professionally at the Capitol, and what did you admire about her?
Yeah, people thought, how could I be, a close friend of a liberal Democrat that we had very different views, and I really thought about that. How do I even answer that? But if you are familiar with the World War II Band of Brothers, they were in these intense trenches, in these intense battles, and Melissa was the leader of the House. I was the leader of the Senate. She was Democrat. I was Republican, but we had to fashion agreements through the death of George Floyd, through COVID, through the riots that followed, through the defund the police, all the different things that we had to find solutions. And it was incredibly intense. The base from one side or the other would hammer us if they felt like we were giving in too much. And so as we accomplished that, we actually did do what was right for Minnesota. It really made our friendship even stronger. So much so that after every session, even after I was gone, and during sessions, if I had an idea that I thought she should pay attention to, we would communicate and talk about it. And the very last communication I had with her was a couple days after session, maybe one. And I said, that had to have been a hard vote for you. I was talking about her and the difficult vote she had to make from her point of view. And she said, we should get together for a glass of wine and I'll tell you the rest of the story. And that was it. That was the last word.
And for a lot of folks who have been watching the news or following the coverage of the Capitol, those were sort of the lasting memories that many people will have of her, as you may have seen. So just for context here, the vote was, she was the Democrat that had the deciding vote to remove MinCare from undocumented adults in Minnesota. And it was something that she did not want to do, and made that very clear. The only way that budget was going to be settled and we could get through that session and avoid a government shutdown was for that compromise to happen. And that was the line in the sand that the Republicans drew. So just for some context, we saw her in tears afterward in one of the last interviews that we would have done with her. And had you ever seen her get emotional like that? What did that tell you?
Yeah, behind the scenes, because we had to make tough decisions. There was, after the death of George Floyd and the anti-police movement, she really was pushing for some reforms. I didn't need to do any reforms, and I didn't want to hurt our police force. And so we worked through some of the really tough negotiations, and she was getting tremendous pressure from part of her Democrat caucus saying we demand all of these certain things, which she didn't have the power to do. It required me to work with her, and it was very emotional during those times. But I can say that, she was I used to say she was, a pragmatic liberal, and I meant that as a compliment. I was a pragmatic conservative, but as a result of that and her pushing for what she believed was right, we were able to do some really good legislation for police reforms, public safety reforms that almost everybody supported. And so, that speaks to her tenacious ability to get things done, but it also shows that she had a heart and was trying to do the right thing from her point of view.
I wanted to ask you too about that and the policies that were important to her, the things that have been put into place that we will see here and maybe even generations from now will benefit from.
I think the police reforms that we did in 2020, I think that was the main ones were in the summer of 2020. It was so interesting because some of the people that were both Republican and Democrat, House and Senate, just wouldn't do anything. And so we rolled up our sleeves and started working on it. And in the end, we made such good progress that the people that could carry it were willing to carry it as a good piece. And I mean, I think that really spoke of how we're going to thread the needle when we have these massive riots. And people are so against the police when that was a huge mistake. I mean, our police were just trying to do the best job they can, and sometimes things don't go the way they want it to. And so it was this incredibly emotional time. And I think, to me, I felt most satisfied working on that piece of legislation with her. And in the end, we didn't take any credit for it. We gave it to the other people that were involved. And so, there's other ones, but that's one that I felt proud of, and I think she felt proud of. Other bills she might have felt proud of, and I didn't feel proud of, And so, but this was one we worked on together that I think was really important.
I don't know if you had a chance to meet her husband, Mark, ever, or spend any time with him. I'm curious if not, if you could just speak to the support role that a spouse or children or other people have in the life of somebody with such a high profile position.
Well, it absolutely is critical. And I can't tell you that I knew Mark well. I will tell you a story. When Hortman first became the leader, I'd been leader for 2 years. And prior to her coming on the scenes, I tried to lower the tone. I think I had some impact there. But that was where she was coming from too. And she was very relational. She knew that relations were important. And so she said, let's get for dinner, you and me, our spouses, but also our chiefs of staff and their spouses. So the 8 of us sat around a table, I think it was a steakhouse in Maple Grove, and just talked as human beings. And it really was valuable. And that was something that she did that made a difference. And I'll tell you, in 2019, we both traveled on a government trip to Italy, a government exchange trip. And my wife and I had arrived early, and then she came early as well. And she didn't have a ride. And we had rented a car. We were going to go all over northern Italy. And my wife said, you should ask her to come with us. We'll give her a ride. And at first she was standoffish because we weren't as close as we were now. And but she's decided to do it. And then we said, well, let's just do some touring. And it was like, this is how it should be. Think about Reagan and Democrat Tip O'Neill. They were locked heads, but in the end, they actually were good friends. And that relationship, that friendship, is what caused them to make government work for everyone. And it's the example that I hope she definitely set, and I hope I set as well.
Yeah, I just happened to look up, I noticed your book there. I think this is something that you just put out fairly recently. It actually has, I believe, Governor Walz in the title of the book. I have not read the book. I am curious if you can tell me a little bit about the tone of it. What was the messaging that you wanted to try to get across? Because when you look at it, you think, wow, this is going to be brutal, right? It's got his name on it, but what was your intention?
So when I wrote the book, it was a year ago, January. It
Mm.
was my wife and I were down in Florida. We have a condo down there, and I just really felt impressed to write this manuscript, tell the stories of the many things that worked in government. I try to treat people the way I want to be treated, and so I wrote that, finished it, and then suddenly Tim Walz is the VP candidate, and then the second half of the book, I am more confrontational against Governor Walz, just decisions he made that I just didn't think were good. Always respectful, and I still respect him today. But the people that were helping me to publish it said we want to change the title. So the title would have been "Raise the Bar, Lower the Tone: Politics with Honor." And so the first half of the book is all about that. The second half of the book is more the difficulty in confronting a governor you disagree with. But I do think there's a lot of lessons in there that people could maybe listen to now. And I speak very positively about Melissa Hortman in the book. I acknowledge the role she played in Minnesota government, and that it really made a difference for how things got done in Minnesota.
How important is it for everyone not to normalize this particular situation with this suspect and what he's accused of doing here?
So how do we get to a cool down period? Because you have a CEO of United Health murdered just because he's a CEO of a health insurance company. You have a president attempted assassination on the candidate Trump twice, and you have this action, which could have been way, way worse, all in the last 12 months. And so I really think about this. I hope people of faith really take this to prayer. How do we make a difference? How do we engage in the people around us? And I'm on X quite a bit, and I really try when I'm confronting to just speak the truth. And if I see somebody way out of line, I mean, somebody on one of my tweets that I hate Walz, and I said, hate is not the answer. And I talked about what love is the answer. And you can confront and still be loving, still be compassionate. But if you hate and you allow all the emotions around that to wrap you up, you can be directed into some really dark places, as we've seen. And so, that's what I want my message to be going forward. I'm not in office anymore. I put out a scripture, I want to be a peacemaker. Blessed are the peacemaker; they shall be called the sons of God. And if we can figure out how to do more of that, others, I saw one of the other congressmen talked about, better angels, that we need to lean into the better part of us. And, that was a Democrat. I don't know if he wants to be named, so I won't. But we need more of that, and a lot more of that.
Former Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka, we really appreciate your time. Our condolences. This is so difficult for so many people, and we really appreciate you wanting to honor her memory today by telling us your personal experiences with Representative Melissa Hortman.
One more story, if I can.
Oh, please, yes.
This is so interesting. So we had, and I can't remember for sure which moment this was, but it's either after we got the public safety bill done or the budget the next year, which was so, they're always hard, right? And you always got to give a little more than you want to give. And she was stuck. And she said, can you at least do this one thing? Otherwise, I can't get it out of my side. And so I made a decision to do it. I don't even know what it was. But, at the very, very end, we're wrapping it up in the Senate. And all of a sudden, she comes over and she gives me this great big hug, just thanking me and basically saying, I don't really care if people see that I'm hugging you and I appreciate you, And so, that's the thing. We build friendships on both sides of the aisle. And if we don't, you better start doing that. And then if somebody's doing something right, don't be afraid to say it. Our public needs to see that. We correct each other all the time, but there's a lot of things happening that are good that we should start talking more about.
Yeah, it seems like she would want that. Everything you just talked about, that's what she would want. Thank you again. Really appreciate the insight and your time to share those memories.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, take care.